Continuing the discussion on digital network building and business practices, let's now welcome Mr. Andre Beijen, Head of KPN Network Innovation. And he'll be discussing with us this afternoon the overriding importance of a well-structured network in the company's digital transformation. Thank you.
Ni hao. Thank you for me to be here. It's a great honor. And I would like to take you on the journey that KPN is making to become a digital telco provider. I work for KPN in the Netherlands, and we are the incumbent telecom operator. So we have a multi-brand strategy in the mobile network side, and we have fixed networks, we have ICT products, and we do about 7 billion revenues per year. Broadband, mobile, television. So it's a full range of applications. So let me take you back on what we've done the last year. So we said we're going to build this whole SDN and NFV world in multiple generations. So we don't want to make the perfect architecture in one go, but we want to learn. So we develop our architecture in generations. The first years we focused on processes, on technology, and on people, organization. So it was a great learning experience because NFV and SDN is quite new. And if you go to it the way we were used to build networks, and you try to do that in the SDN world, you get stuck. So you have to totally redefine how you do it, what you're doing, and how it's monetized. And that's what we focused on in the first year. So on the process side, we had to learn how to onboard all these virtual network functions and how to onboard customers or even development teams. Also on testing, we had to develop new testing processes, new testing environment. It was completely different than we used to. So on the organization, of course, you have to develop your skills and your knowledge. It's different. But we also had to change the way we work. We were used to develop networks in a waterfall. But in an SDN environment, it's different. You can do agile or DevOps, and we had to learn what that was. But I think the most important change in the organization was that we involved customers in the development of our networks. And that was new for us. We were used to think for customers, develop networks for them, and now we involve them in the development process. So we call that co-creation, and that was a new way of working for us. So on the technology side, we did only the network function infrastructure, NFVI. We built a data center, SDN, so basic steps. And we onboarded some VNFs to test how redundancy is working, how security is working, stuff like that. So very basic, but it was a very exciting year. So let me take you on where we are now. We want to become a digital telco. So what does that mean? So we feel that your network should always move with you as a customer. So wherever you go, you bring your network with you. And it adapts to your needs. So you have to be able to reconfigure it real time. And each customer gets his own network. So in the old days, that wasn't possible because your cost would totally explode. But with this new SDN technology, you can configure and slice your network and give each customer its own network. So network virtualization and software-defined networking brings you all that. So the technology enables a new era. So now we are at the second generation. The first generation is the basic infrastructure, some basic VNFs. And the second generation will really help us further. So I was at a very interesting discussion yesterday in a roundtable discussion with some industry leaders on standardization. So a big debate on standards and too many standards and different standards and conflicting standards. So for the moment, we chose ETSI. So my whole point is, it doesn't matter which standard you choose, as long as you choose one and stick to it. And have the industry also chose one standard. So on the organization, we're going to move further. So we said to our teams, we're going to get agile to the max. So everything agile. Because this new technology will bring us a way of working that we can really develop our networks in short cycles. So bring functionality to your customers every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, and fail very fast. So don't think it all through, but get used to failure. And that's a mindset for the industry that is not common yet. Also, you need to rethink your sourcing. So I will come back to that later, but you have to rethink the whole value chain. So in the old days, we had suppliers, and they deliver you boxes, and you design a network, and you bring that to your customer. And now the whole ecosystem has changed, so you need to also change your sourcing. And on the processes, it's standardization, standardization, standardization. Why? Because the whole industry is talking about automation, and you cannot automate complexity. You can do that, but it will be a very expensive project, and it will take you a very long time. So you have to rationalize, simplify, and standardize to get your automation full scale. So this is basically our concept of architecture. So in the bottom you have your networks. We call them legacy networks, but mind you, a few years ago we were here on stage discussing the latest generation IP networks, etc. We consider them already legacy, so our development cycle is really fast. You have your legacy networks, you have your standard hardware, switching, compute, underlay, and then you have your virtual network functions and your software-defined networking applications on top of that. So that's your whole network, old and new, together under one decoupled API. So Mr. Wei Leping was also addressing the decouple layer of architecture. So the concept of bringing all your network functions to your customers via an API is different than we used to do it in the past. So you basically decouple your network complexity from your network functions that your customer needs. And we see three types of exposure to customers. One is the traditional OSS. So I don't go in there, everybody knows the OSSs. But there are two new ones. One is a portal that you can provide to your enterprise customer. If they have the knowledge, they can make their own networks from the network functions below. And the second one is the software development kit. You can provide software development kits to really skillful teams that can integrate them with their own platforms. So you have three types of exposure. So expose your network functions, decouple your network functions, and automate everything you can in the lower layers. So expose is based also on agility. In the end of the day, your teams need to become and to learn to become very agile to keep these networks up to speed for their customers. So I mentioned that we are going to go to a world that each customer has his own network. We feel that it's not so far yet. So I deliver network functions to my colleague at Service Platforms. They build TV services on top of that, or voice services, or cloud services. But they need programmable networks from the network side. So it's all about maximizing the utility of your networks. So if you make it standard functions, you get an increase in the utilization of your assets, and that's the whole game. So we used to build networks that were based on a peak capacity. So you invest quite a lot of money, and it's empty half of the time. But with this new SDN technology, you can increase the utilization of your network functions. And that's the whole game, and exposing network functions to different teams. They can utilize your network more and more and more. So the second one is decoupling. So the biggest issue in the industry is not technology. We have a room full of engineers. We can do technology. The biggest issue is always migration. So how do you get your customers or your platforms from the old world to the new world? That was the case in all IP, and that's certainly the case now. So how do you migrate your customers without customer impact, or without destroying too much value? So we believe that making a good decoupling between your network assets and your customers, you can migrate your customers to the new world without them knowing. So there is almost never a customer that only has new functions. They nearly always have old and new networks, and you have to integrate them. So by decoupling network functions, you can integrate them without the complexity of both worlds. So you get your customers independent of your own network changes. And the last one is automate. So you want to have a near real-time configuration of your network. That's the requirement from, well, specifically business customers, but more and more from our development teams internally as well. So how do you do that? You expose network functions, and you give them the toolkit to develop their own networks on top of your controlled, standardized API. So below that, you can fully automate every standard function. So in the new world, you do that from the start, but in the old world, you still have many unautomized processes. So the big issue is, how do you automate over the two domains, the legacy and the new world? That's a big challenge. So your legacy, you need to rationalize and simplify. You cannot automate complexity. So if you don't do a maximal simplification of your legacy networks, or a rationalization of your network functions over different networks, then automation becomes very, very complex. So we always talk about the network, but I don't know how it is with other operators, but we don't have one network. We have many networks. So it's a matter of selecting the legacy network that you want to keep and getting rid of all the other networks that have the same function. That is basically rationalization. And simplification, it is the optimization of the uses of functions in the network. So at the SDN Congress last week, I gave the example of a DNS. So there are many DNS servers throughout a telco operator. And if you rationalize and simplify, you can bring all the DNS functionality to one or two DNS boxes or virtual functions. And then it becomes more easy to automate instead of doing the automation over all the different DNS domains. And this is the big elephant in the room. We advocate a no-compromise standardization to prevent vendor lock-in. So I'm quite aware that I'm on the stage of a Huawei conference, but it is imperative that you standardize your interfaces. And why? That is because to keep everybody sharp. So we need to think about a vendor-agnostic implementation. So you can enforce in the new world standardization while you're onboarding. So we developed testing scripts and onboarding scripts, and every VNF vendor that wants to be on our virtualization or SDN platform needs to go to the same rigid standardization requirements. That will prevent vendor lock-in. So on sourcing, so this was the interesting part yesterday on the roundtable discussion. We believe in open source and sourcing effectiveness. So yesterday there was a big discussion on open source. It's a bit of a conflict with standardization. But we believe that if you open up your interfaces, if you open up your APIs, you get more and more developers on board to help you develop functions. So we also need to learn more and more programming ourselves, automation ourselves, developing network functions ourselves. So that is opposite of what the industry has been doing the past few years. We have outsourced all our development basically in the industry. And we need to rethink that model together with our partners. So we cannot, as an operator, we cannot develop hardware. But however, we can develop software and scripting. And why is that important? So your operator knowledge, your process knowledge can go into that software configuration, and you bring basically your customer inside your technology. You build it, every customer, its own network by using the customer knowledge and putting that in your software configurations. So Huawei and other vendors, they are very good in developing hardware. So x86, common platforms, white boxes, etc. That's, I think, common hardware. But there will be a room for specific hardware on high-performance networks, like optical networks or high-volume switching networks. So we need to rethink the whole ecosystem. So SDN and NFV will enable us to become a digital telco. So we have some very tough decisions to make. So do we go for certain standards? Do we slice our architecture? How fast do we want to go? Do we want to wait for the industry, or do we want to be front runner? These are all difficult decisions, but you have to make them. And the second one is, yeah, we fully expose our network to everybody who wants to use it, to maximize the utilization of our assets, but also to enforce us internal standards on the APIs. So we decouple services from networks, and that's a big advantage. So if you can basically design your architecture as if you were an OTT company. So you design your network functions, and you totally decouple them from your services to customers. That way, migrations can be very easy, but also resilience and redundancy and security can be made very simple. So decoupling is a very big thing. And last but not least, automate, automate, automate. We need zero-touch operations to be able to have near real-time customer demands, and also bringing each customer its own network. That cannot be done by hand. You need to automate. But for automation, you need standardization and simplification and rationalization. So that's the big thing for us, I think, for the industry. So, Chi.
Thank you very much. Thank you, well done.